Welcome back to another video. This is Yao from Vantage Tutor, a class above the rest. And for today's Prelim Paper review, it is a WA1 special and it is from 2026 Anglo-Chinese Junior College, JC2 H2 Math WA1. Now before I begin, these are the questions that I feel are insightful and probably worth the time to try. And if you would like to try this paper, you're invited to join my Telegram channel where I've uploaded a short summary along with the download link on my blog. Have a go at it, let me know how you did. And yes, I've started a tuition center. It's located near Boon Keng and ACJC. Regular classes are up and running and the full schedule can be found on my website. And for the March holidays, I'll be running a vectors intensive revision class. There will be 4 seats remaining. For the students who are interested to learn just vectors itself before you move on to your stats and to prepare for your A-levels so that this topic will appear as free marks to you, wait no more, sign up via the link in the bio. I'll see you there. Firstly, this WA was shared with me out of good news, out of joy, because my student did very well for this paper. In fact, she scored an A, and to be honest, she did miss my expectation by a bit. And for a moment, I thought this was an easy paper and that would kind of discredit her, but then I realized why I thought it was easy, and that's what I'm going to share with you today in this video. For more detailed analysis, go onto my YouTube, but for now, let's find out via my 3 matrices. Number 1, relevance. Number 2, insightfulness. Number 3, difficulty. Before I give an overall score, I recommend to you the type of student who should try this paper. And of course, if I had a student who had to sit for this paper under exam condition, what would be a fair expectation of him from me in order for him to score an A in his actual A-levels? Firstly, relevance. The topics tested. Maclaurin series. PNC probability. This is going to appear very unusual to most of you because usually in JC2, we are looking to clear all your pure math topics first before moving on to statistics, and the first topic in your statistics will be your PNC and probability. And therefore for WA1, most of you wouldn't be doing PNC, most of you wouldn't be doing probability. And for that, some of you would not find this paper relevant in terms of your WA1 practice already. However, if you look at the questions individually, the Maclaurin series question, you realize this is not within your expectation. This is not what you usually see in the A-levels. If you haven't realized by now, Maclaurin series tend to require a lot of differentiation technique, a lot of your implicit differentiation, getting the second and third derivative before finding out what the derivative is when x is equals to 0. This paper, despite having 2 questions on Maclaurin series, did not offer any of that. However, that is not to say that these questions are not relevant. In fact, some of the most interesting A-level question on Maclaurin series is precisely like this: standard series application and your small angle approximation. And most students will fumble with this too because they think they understand what Maclaurin series is, they think they know what a standard series is until they try this question, and then they'll be surprised that their answer is wrong because they don't know what's the one main characteristic to adhere to in order to apply your MF27 standard series and why. What's the reason behind it? And therefore most of you will collapse for this. As for PNC and probability, rather standard, but more about that later on. And hence the relevance of this paper will be rather low. Not the most usual questions, but not completely unseen in your A-levels and not completely useless in terms of preparing for your A-levels. And hence the relevance of this paper will be given a lower than average 3 out of 10. Next, insightfulness. For the Maclaurin series part, I already spoken about it, the standard series. Do you know how to apply your standard series? However, PNC, this I have a lot to say. By the time you're taking your A-levels, this will be the only concern you would have and you can have, because PNC and probability are things that require logic. You cannot fall back on formula, you cannot fall back on just practice and knowing how to solve them. Like in your Maclaurin series. Maclaurin series, you know, differentiate over and over again. Make sure you apply your implicit differentiation, know when to change it, when to sub in your x equals 0, and make sure all your algorithm or your expansion is correct. But PNC is not like that. Sometimes you double count and you don't know why. And this paper offers none of that. The PNC questions about where to sit, straightforward. Slot in technique, grouping, your probability question. Most of you wouldn't realize it, but the key information in question 5 is that it is independent. When I see the word independent, I would have so much fun with this question. I will make it so easy to solve for this question. In fact, if you understand binomial distribution really well, this question is a good lead up to your binomial distribution, and you can see how PNC can come into play for your probability. And maybe that will come across as insights for some of you, and this will be rather insightful for my students because of what I am going to tell them. But for everybody else, for question 5, let's say you didn't know anything about using the word independent or PNC to solve it. All you have to do, draw a tree, extend until it looks like a Kalimantan rainforest. You probably can solve the question. And therefore, is it insightful? Not really. But there is one part that is insightful in this paper, and that is question 4. Question 4 is a very fearsome question. I personally am very afraid of it because this kind of Venn diagram question, especially for part B, yes, I can tell you how to solve it. Yes, I can tell you the logic of solving it using a Venn diagram, but I find it very hard to justify in terms of real-world example. And maybe that's just me. And for me, part B is the kind of question that most students will ask me to practice with them when it comes to the prelim period and all that. Because this kind of question really, because of what I said just now, it's very hard to apply to real-world example. It's very hard to tell you logically, and then you just have to fall back on a Venn diagram. You're not really understanding anything. You're just solving it because of what you see on the Venn diagram, and that's rather limited. And therefore, the insightfulness of this paper, as much as it does offer some, if you discount the Maclaurin's part altogether, but because of how the Maclaurin's part is useful, precisely because it's not so relevant, precisely because it's a rather rare question, and then the Venn diagram question, and then of course the independent probability question does offer some insights. It does offer you something to learn, but you do need someone to explain it to you. And therefore, the insightfulness of this paper is only going to be rather average. It's not offering the spice that you're usually looking for in P and C and probability. You'll only be given a rather average 5 out of 10. Next, difficulty. I am going to go out on a limb here. It is not difficult, but most of you will have problem scoring. And where would the problem come from? Careless mistakes. And that comes from question 1 and question 2. Again, your standard series. There was a class that I had with my student where we just focused on standard series for the entire 2 hours. We did nothing but expansion. We did nothing but factor formula. We did nothing but just simplifying algebra. And that's what question 1 and 2 is about. If you can handle the number of terms, this would have been an easy 10 marks. But again, this is the real challenge behind these 2 questions. Can you manage your algorithm? And maybe some of you may push even further and say that, well, question 5, if I draw a probability tree diagram, I have so many branches, it will look like the Kalimantan rainforest, and therefore I may lose myself. I agree with you 100%, and that's why some of you may make careless mistakes over here because you do not make use of the term independently. But I'm sure most of you will agree with me. Some of you may lose marks in your P and C. Maybe you're still not very familiar with your slot-in method, and maybe in question 4B, the Venn diagram, I'm not afraid to tell you, question 4B will probably be the one where I lose all my marks in this paper, probably lose half the marks, and I'm not afraid to admit it. And I'm confident that I can still score for this paper, because ultimately, if you look at the entire scope of the paper, if you look at the overall difficulty of this paper, it's not too long. It can be tedious in the first 2 questions, but from question 3, 4, 5, if you know what you're doing, easily you could finish them in maybe 15 minutes for all 3 together. And hence the difficulty of this paper comes from the unusual part of your algebra manipulation, comes from mainly only the first 2 parts of the paper. In a sense, the rest of the questions is either you know or you don't know, and to be frank with you, the last 3 questions, if you can't do them, there is a problem. And hence the difficulty of this paper will be given a more than fair 3 out of 10. Overall, a very strange paper, but a very strange paper that you cannot ignore. Things in this paper are going to be useful to you. The rarity of the Maclaurin series question, the small details of the question, how niche the question is, makes the first 2 questions a good practice for most of you. For 3, 4, and 5, it's really testing you on the basics of probability and permutation and combination. Most of you should be able to handle it. And even if you lose marks in the last 3 questions, at most it's 3 marks to 4 marks. It shouldn't cost you too much. And hence, this paper feels front-loaded, it feels a bit skewed to the first 2 questions, and at the same time, the first 2 questions is not the most typical, it didn't test you on differentiation technique. And I can see the good intentions of this paper, which is that they really tried to restrict the questions to be within the topics being tested. Because some of you may complain, Maclaurin series, why do I have to differentiate so much? This should be about the series itself, and therefore you get questions like this. And to be honest, if I get questions like this, I will hate it, because doing all this standard series expansion, a lot of algebra manipulation, that's when a lot of you will make careless mistakes, precisely because you're prevented from doing your implicit differentiation and finding the derivative. That's why the first 2 questions will cause you to lose marks. A very strange paper. I don't quite know how to rate it, but I'm just going to go with my gut feeling based on whether I will use this paper extensively. The overall score of this paper will be given 4 out of 10. And if I had a student who had to sit for this paper under exam condition, a fair expectation of her would be 80% in order for her to score an A in an actual A level. Finally, who I recommend this paper to? Firstly, I'll recommend this paper as a topical revision to students who are not very good with your Maclaurin series in terms of your standard series. Because as I said over and over again, Maclaurin series, if you look at your typical practice papers, you look at your promo revision package, you will see a lot of derivative. And the questions on standard series are the minority. This is that minority. However, they're not perfect. Usually small angle approximation got to do with a triangle. You have to apply your trigonometry in terms of forecast Lasso sine rule or cosine rule. This question doesn't have that. It's literally just asking you to expand. And then question 3, 4, 5. Simple math. Really showing you what PNC and probability is about. When your formula is not there for you to fall back on, are you still able to score? Do you really understand math, or are you just doing it like an A math? And therefore, if I have to summarize this paper again, and what kind of students should try this paper, it will be this. Question 1 and 2 is just algebra manipulation, maybe a bit of A math. Question 3 and 4 and 5 is just your E math, simple algorithm calculation. And hence, I recommend this paper to students who tend to fall back on formulas, who tend to go back to doing practice questions over and over again in order to get the answer, where you're looking for a set of paper in which the questions do not challenge you on rote memory. It does not challenge you in terms of how much you have practiced, but really challenge you on whether you can handle math at its core, which is logic and also on some level algebra manipulation. And therefore, if you're a student looking for niche questions on Maclaurin series and also looking to practice on the basic foundation, on the more core skill sets required in your PNC and probability, this paper will be perfect for you. Alright, so we have come to the end of this Prelim Paper review of 2026 Anglo-Chinese Junior College JC2 H2 Math WA1. And if you like what I'm doing, follow me on TikTok, like my video, comment, and share with your friends. I'm sure this will help them. And for the students who like a deeper analysis, go onto my YouTube. There will be timestamps to tell you where I'm doing the analysis so they can get more value out of it. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because ultimately, I'm on my way to 10,000 followers. Nothing else. This is Yola from Vantage Tutor, a class above the rest. Take care.